Welcome to another episode of the Chris Roadmap Show. As with every other week, we have my co-hosts. Hi, Chris.
Hey.
Hi, Max.
Hello.
And me, Rod, where we talk about all the latest developments in AI and how this impacts the enterprise, the world of work, and our society. And this week, we have three topics that we want to discuss. How AI is impacting energy systems, how AI continues impacting or not the world of work, and also companies in the software space are benefiting or not from AI. Let's get started. There were two articles this week about AI and energy that caught my attention. So one was at the Washington Post, and it was saying how pretty much like the consumption of AI around the world is having enterprises, countries, the society scrambling. To draw this a parallel, you might remember the crypto craze from a few years ago. And a common argument was that Bitcoin consumes so much energy as in Argentina and so on. This is very pollutant, which pretty much put off people away from crypto. Now we're starting to see some similar discussion with AI. But is there truth to that? How do you see here consumption of AI and how it's impacting our energy grid, our environment, and everything energy related?
I mean, it's a super relevant topic. And I think the more general question is, how does technology impact energy consumption as a whole? And there are different ways to look at it, right? So I think I was very surprised or very shocked by the numbers. So in the US, data centers are projected to be 8% of total power consumption by 2030 from 3%. I think a number that I've also seen is that by 2034, all the data center energy consumption will be as much as what India uses today. And granted, obviously we can debate how much India needs, but obviously as a big country and with 1.4 billion people, this is already really huge just to grasp that concept. And I think this is really also, taking or impacting our environment when it comes to energy consumption. I think a couple of other numbers that I found, which I also thought were shocking. There are projections of data center data processing. So we're talking about bytes and information being sent back and forth. In 2010, we talk about 2 zettabytes. That's basically 1,000 of a gigabyte that we normally use. And this number is actually already went up 60x to 60x, so to 120 zettabytes. And over the next 2 years is also going to have another 150% increase, right? So that's a number that's so big. Like basically what it means is it could be 250 billion DVDs stored in that amount, or you could have 2 trillion songs or 85 trillion books. That's how much of a data consumption we have. And I thought that was incredible. One of the factors of limitations of how fast we're going to adopt new technologies when it comes to AI. Max, what's your thoughts on that?
Whenever there's a new technology, we always consume a lot of energy, right? If you think about cars, for example, the reason why petrol is so expensive because of the advent of cars and as well as all the different machines that we use to run it with either, I would say, natural resources powered electricity grid or just petrol straight up for cars and planes with kerosene. I think when it comes to technology, well, I feel like this is equivalent to some of the older technology that came about in the 1900s. We have to see this as a new way of bringing people together, a new wave of technology that eventually will change our life. I think I'm making a big statement here. From an energy consumption perspective, I think every single country are also thinking about energy security, right? Especially here in the UK, one of the big manifesto of the government is to create our own energy company so that it becomes cheaper. I think the advent of AI, the consumption of data, when you try to get people more online, get people spend more time online, that will have an impact on the overall energy production and consumption in the country, and hence directly impacts, I guess, different security as well. As a whole, I think the world it's a good thing because we have better services. But I think companies will probably have to think about that in a little bit more deliberate fashion. I heard that, like Microsoft, for example, is probably the largest, if I'm not wrong, one of the largest construction company out in the US because they built so many data centers. Like they have teams of teams that building up data centers, which is, the precursor to energy consumption in the US. At the moment, US don't have a problem with energy, but down the line, given the amount of services they're trying to serve the world, I wonder would that become the problem, right? Think of your software as a service, all your Facebook, everything is all hosted in the US. That's, for example, right? Obviously they host elsewhere. If all of them are hosted in the US, how would that change to build a company because of the energy consumption required? So this is just, I guess, musing that I have in my head when I look at the overall energy consumption. We'd love to dive deeper around, I guess, how would that affect the overall price if we don't use those energy on data centers? Where could it have been gone to? I guess that's the question.
Let's think about so here the enterprise for a second. And for example, in the article there is this number that they have identified where they say that a ChatGPT search consumes 10 times more energy than a regular Google search. So if we think about the enterprise, how do you think this will impact all the ESG guidelines, all the corporate social responsibility ones? Will it be that on one side, companies need to start paying attention for whom they derive AI services such that this does not impact their ESG reports? Will it be that there will be vendors that will be preferred because they are like green vendors or they are more energy efficient vendors? How do you see this affecting any type of like enterprise usage or enterprise adoption of AI tools? Chris?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask this particular question, but I think there's one challenge around tracking that. And can you track it? But I think the bigger problem is really where do you build these data centers and can you operate them in a more, more climate friendly way? Because data centers like consume so much energy, as we said, but also because you need a lot of cooling. So, for example, I know that there were a couple of companies, I think Google even, that wanted to build new data centers somewhere in Spain, but because Spain has gotten so hot, they actually decided not to build the data centers there anymore because it's simply too costly and too climate unfriendly to cool down the data centers in that particular location. And I think that's going to be a struggle going forward. And as I said, I think last episode we talked about the limitations from a data perspective, like, AI is actually already consuming all the data in the world. Like, what are we going to do with that? And today we're actually talking about all the energy that AI is taking up space. But Rod, what's your perspective when it comes to sustainability?
I see that this might be a differentiator for startups. I think that companies who decide, for example, to use different energy sources to go green, let's say from day one, and who can prove that, they might score points in the enterprise. They might have here a argument that differentiates themselves from others. There is this direction. The other direction is in consumption and efficiency of the technology itself. A couple of weeks ago, I was at an event organized by Intel where they were showcasing their latest developments. And they were showing a new chipset that allows you to run AI workloads similar to how it will be with a GPU, such as the ones offered by NVIDIA, but with the difference that although performance will be fairly similar, consumption will be half. So we'll be seeing that on one side, vendors of hardware like Intel, NVIDIA, and so on, they will be having more hardware, energy efficient hardware over the years. But also the model developers like Meta, Mistral, and so, they will be looking into having more power efficient models. And definitely the startups and companies building on top of this, they will also looking to source their energy from greener sources, be more efficient and so on, such that they can have here an edge. Max, as an investor, and if someone comes and say, I have here a AI company and my angle is to be more energy efficient, or my angle is will be primarily like green energy and so on, do you think this gives them an edge? Would you be interested in looking at them just because of this AI perspective that is more energy efficient? Or will you say, no, in the end, for example, OpenAI will always have this edge because they have the most resources. Also, they are the ones that have the best talent. And as a result, they can optimize this energy consumption or waste in the best possible manner.
So I think there are two questions to that. So I'll tell you what I'm thinking. Number one is around the efficiency of the chipset. And number two is around the energy. It depends on what type of renewable energy that you're consuming. So I think from an economics perspective, if you're more efficient with your chipset, basically it means that you'll be able to run more. You have bigger capacity, especially in larger corporates. We tend to think about that a lot, right? So if we're not using those capacity here, can we deploy it elsewhere? Therefore, overall, you'll be able to reduce costs. So the same thinking already happened, let's say, with cloud, right? With the containerization of different applications, so that you'll be able to ditch out the capacity to do something else. Because within a large enterprise, you have multiple different applications running at the same time. So being more efficient really then translate over to like cost efficiency. So I think that in itself will happen. And if that cost efficiency is huge, which I've seen a few startups out there trying to differentiate themselves, running quantum computing model, quant models, a lot more efficient to traditional ways of running quant models, like 20x, for example, then it intrigues everyone within a large organization because it could mean millions and millions of dollars on savings. So that's one. I guess the second part around the renewable energy consumption. So the renewable energy consumption question is, at the moment, at best, a very European thing. At worst, like people are just trying to make things up. And the reason why I said that is because it's very hard to track it. If you look at the US, when it comes to their regulation, we don't know what will happen with the election. I think it will directly affect the overall tracking of those renewable energy stuff. Like there are rules out there already looking at, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, which then allows you to kind of disclose where your energy comes from. And a lot of it, if you are running data centers, depends on your energy grid, right? Where are you sourcing those energy from? If you're just taking it from your existing grid that has coal in it, then you're unfortunately going to be dirty data centers. But if your grid has a lot of green energies already, which I believe, let's say, for example, Germany, 45 to 50% already on renewable energies. So that in itself would have helped solve a lot of problems. Then will they then do extra stuff to offset the extra energy? I think that will be less relevant from an investment perspective immediate, if you will, because the economics is not about them doing more, but it's about them being able to close deals with their data centers. People are willing to pull data onto those data centers. The key business is still selling the data centers application. And then will they lose deals because they don't have some sort of green energy certificate? Maybe. But will they win deals with green energy certificate? That I'm not so sure yet.
I want to mention two parts here also. One is an opportunity when it comes to data centers, maybe piggybacking on the investor perspective. And then I think I also want to mention a risk, like a second and third order consequence risk. The opportunity, and I was very surprised to see the numbers here, is obviously who actually funds these data processing or data centers. And also maybe from a private perspective, I was thinking, okay, how can we as normal people invest into this growth? There were so many deals actually in the last 3 years, right? So the deals in 2020 were $34 billion for $34 billion. And that actually grew to 48, so 40% increase. And it already gotten 24 billion also in the first half of 2022. So there's huge investment going into that space. And what's even more impressive is to know that private equity buyers are the majority of data center owners, right? So above 90% are now private equity owned, which I thought was very interesting, because obviously you have 10% growth year on year currently, and they're trying to cash on that trend. I think on the risk side, now that the world is becoming even more reliant on AI and therefore data centers, and you have physical locations, obviously the question is how can you be securing these data centers also just from a geopolitical point of view? I was just looking at the top 5 locations for data centers, and it seems to be the US with Northern Virginia, you have London in the UK, Frankfurt in Germany, Silicon Valley, and Singapore being the most strategic, important, or largest data center locations. And I think those will become very important also for governments to protect, to secure, and making sure that obviously no attacks, or it's attack prone or safe, so that obviously the internet works and therefore also the economies.
I agree with both of you. And really, so it's something where so many things are involved, and this is like a non-trivial problem in the end. So where we have to consider the consumption, also what governments are doing, the idea of sovereignty that goes on energy sovereignty, data sovereignty, what even like the NVIDIA founder calls AI sovereignty. So in the end, we might end up having like islands of highly efficient economies who decides to go all in making this a differentiator. Companies as well. For example, Microsoft allegedly wants to develop further atomic fusion, and they claim that by 2028, less than 4 years from now, they will have already technology available that can power AI and their data centers. We'll see that happens. The scientists quoted are highly skeptical of that, but we see that as technology permeates our society, definitely we'll start to think more and more on, when I run a ChatGPT query, how much energy am I consuming? How much am I impacting the environment? And so here Chris was suggesting that we start labeling our sections with different titles. And for this, the idea was to call it Powering the AI Revolution, the Energy Crisis Behind Our Digital Future. So let us wrap here our first segment and let us get into the second one that we can call it Power Struggles and Job Juggles, Navigating AI Double-Edged Sword. What is it meant by that? Well, across the show, we have been constantly discussing about how AI is impacting the job market. Is it or not? We always have different opinions here. And we're starting to see first numbers coming out. Just this week, the Wall Street Journal, they had an article with data from Upwork, which is this marketplace for freelancers where people can offer any type of creative, so freelancing jobs and so on. And they were already reporting how this is impacting the freelancer market. And they had very interesting numbers I want to share before here I get the takes. So here from our co-hosts. So they were saying that, for example, for writing jobs, already the number of the salary that people can command, the payment that they can get for any type of writing jobs since the release of ChatGPT number 2022 has gone down by 20%. Translation jobs is 10%. Sales and marketing, 8%. So in general, we are seeing a decrease of that. And along these lines, also funnily, we had this same week an interview with the CTO of OpenAI, who was quoted saying that maybe some creative jobs should not exist at all. So she was saying some creative jobs will go away, but maybe they shouldn't have been there in the first place. So here, Max, so we also have this idea of creative destruction. We also think that new jobs will appear and maybe some are gone, but in the end, it's always better for society. What are your thoughts? More so considering that also this same week, we had a quote from the Financial Times stating that the San Francisco Fed president went out to quell concerns that AI could negatively impact the US labor market. And so the person is saying it's just a natural evolution of the economy. So we're starting to see that on one side, consumption may be problematic, but also so what is happening with our jobs and our salaries also is problematic. Your thoughts, Max?
So how should I think about it? So one of the key things that I always think about is how labor and capital is increasingly decoupled. Labor is really trying to put things together. And then you have the owners who invest into those plants, who then, there is a coupling of labor and capital. And then in the 20th century, with the advent of, let's say, software, we're able to do a lot of those labor without the need of the labor. Basically, just software taking over some of those jobs. And now with Gen AI, you're looking at that taking over some of the, I would say, white collar labor job rather than blue collar labor job. So we're starting to see, I guess, that shift to that, labor and capital decoupling even more. And the reason why I think it's important is when you think about job, it's all about production. It's all about adding value to society. It's all about, eventually a lot of things that we need to service the economy. It's all around us. It's all being taken care of. Hence, I don't know if this is a little bit crazy to think about. I do share the vision of Sam Altman saying that eventually AI will be able to do a lot of the things that we need from a day-to-day perspective, and therefore you don't really need people to work on a lot of those jobs. Hence, the idea of universal basic income comes into play. There is a book by one of the investors of Union Square Ventures, which talks a little bit about why the world needs UBI. I think the tying of jobs with income and capital indirectly is super important. And the way I think about it is, if those services can be replaced with AI in the long term, then a lot of people will not be working, will also not be needed to work. The way we will receive those services will also be cheaper, simply because it's really produced entirely by technology. But in the short term, there are going to be a transition period starting from one segment, like for example, writing to begin with, and slowly eating it up to other parts of the labor market, if you will. Even within financial services, there are studies around where you can use Gen AI to read financial statements and provide some sort of inference better than your normal analyst will be. So does that mean that you will eventually shrink the analyst class for a lot of this larger financial services firm? And over time, if they become better, why do you even need the financial services folks, right? You could really use the AI because they're trained on, I don't know, multiple decades of knowledge or multiple centuries of knowledge on how to, invest, how to put your capital on one side to work. But then it all becomes futile if the capital that you need to buy those services are no longer tied together because they're all technically free. So the way I think about it is obviously more from a philosophical way, but if you work backwards, then the question becomes, what are the little things that we're seeing that is debunking that hypothesis or supporting that hypothesis? Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, maybe my answer is very short. As an ex-consultant, I thought about it obviously more of a high level and what are the jobs that are getting impacted, what are the jobs not getting impacted? And I think that's the key question, not only for a newly grads that are thinking about going into the industry, but I'm also sure for our listeners here to think about, okay, what are some of the parts of either the organization or which industries are going to see the effect most? And obviously I have a 2x2. Unfortunately, I can't show it here right now, but I'm going to describe it and let me do this very quickly. So to me, I think 2 dimensions that are relevant is how proprietary the data is, data, information, or IP on one hand, and the other one is how many assets or how heavy asset is your business. Heavy asset meaning you have a lot of capital hardware that you need in order to operate your business, or how protected is your industry, or how important is the physical component to your business model. This is how I think about it. Now, obviously, that's the 2x2, whether the quadrants, the low data or proprietary data or information, and the low or light asset, we call it, that's the quadrant that will be replaced by AI. It's stuff like design, translation, copywriting, anything that is replicable, that is digital, that is definitely an opportunity or risk, depending on who you are, that can be replaced by AI. Now, if you have proprietary data, but you're still digital or still light asset, then it's more of a transformation game. So for example, an insurance company has a lot of proprietary data, but obviously it doesn't require so much capital assets. It's a peace of mind game, so to speak. And for these kind of businesses and industry, it's more around, okay, they're going to need to figure out what do they do with their proprietary data in order to, adapt to this new era of AI. So it's really more about AI transformation, if you want, or setting your organization up for success for the next coming years. Other industries, I believe, are in there is obviously anything pharmaceutical, maybe e-commerce, where you have a lot of data, so you can actually use that data to get an edge and an advantage within that space. On the other hand, you have on the heavy asset or protected assets or physical component, you have on the lower end, you have the AI enhancement. What does it mean? So we're in this world where you have low proprietary data or low IP or barrier to entry, but it's still very capital intensive. For example, you have transportation being very physical, right? Like you have to still move stuff from A to B. Mining would be also another example, or food and beverages where you actually have to sit down and eat. You can't do this digitally. Here, I actually believe that you can enhance quite a bit with AI. So for example, you can provide a better experience. Maybe on the logistics front, you could provide better analytics. So that's really more of an enhancement of AI rather than a replacement of the jobs by AI. Then on top, the top right, you have high proprietary data and heavy assets or protected or physical. And those I would call, that's not going to be disrupted in the near future because they're either protected by the government. So for example, the law field, defense, education, healthcare, that's where you have a lot of proprietary data, and it's also very much protected, by the way. And so that to me feels like a way that we can structure and think about the ways of how to think of AI replacing jobs, and also how to protect yourself or what strategy to follow when you think about AI.
And Chris, here, the article was also having quotes from some freelancers who do not see this as all negative, because they were reporting that companies come to them and say, we were getting this very generic text that sounds maybe reasonable, but then it ends up being a word salad. It's not really factual, or it's just made the prose to sound nicely without being relevant in content. And as a result, these companies are looking again for humans to generate new text for the new creatives. Something like that I have been a little bit observing, for example, on social networks, where until a few months ago, I could really spot a trend of people copy-pasting posts generated by AI tools. But now I feel that maybe there's some tiredness behind, such that less and less I'm seeing this. So I don't know if maybe like the filters and the algorithms are getting better at spotting this and maybe reducing the distribution of this content, or just in general that humans might spot it already and not find it any more relevant or insightful and as a result ignore it. How do you see it so for companies, Chris? Do you think that maybe we'll reach a saturation point and people will say, hey, we need humans again, we need real creative work instead of relying on machine generating this for us?
I believe at the end, we're all going to be quality managers, right? So that we will outsource some of the workflow to AI, and then we still need to look at it. And again, we had that conversation before that interns and younger folks will need to think about, or juniors, where they get the training before they become seniors and being able to supervise AI. I think the second thought I had on that was I kind of envy people that are just graduating, because I think the opportunity is that they can grow up learning how to work with AI. Whereas I think everyone who is already in the workforce will have a pain of actually adapting to this new world and to this kind of new potential and opportunity.
One thought also having is, for example, if we think back to the late 90s, the early 2000s and so on, when the internet was still very young, and also, for example, mobile phones, we had MIDI songs and all these synthetic sound that was generated, very simple synthesizers. And that was in all websites you will go, there will always be some MIDI playing in the background. Also, you'll have your ringtones that will be like some MIDI songs and so on. But today it has disappeared, right? Like who these days has a dedicated ringtone on their phones? Who puts some song in the background on their websites? Pretty much nobody. So here I also wonder if it might be something similar, where in the end, synthetic music has been there for a very long time, but still we as humans keep going to other musicians who are also humans to listen to their songs. Max, do you see yourself pretty much just relying on AI-generated content? Do you think that when you are looking for any type of freelancers or external suppliers for any type of creative work that you require, you will rely rather on AI tools? Or do you see that human creativity is so unique that better you rely on a human doing this for you?
I think it really depends on the task. It really depends on the circumstances as well. I must say, so far, if it's a low value task, I've been using AI to at least generate the first draft, and then utilizing whatever I know to help to improve that as I go, or the other way around, right? I just type up a first draft, utilizing AI to try to improve it a little bit. However, if it's a very high value task, so think of it like writing an investment memo, I would still want to work with a human to be able to debate the points out, because it's less about just the presentation of the points. It's more about the substance of the points. So that's something I felt that with the current AI projects, it depends, or should I say, with the current AI solutions out there, it really depends on whether or not the task that I'm doing is super high value, requires a lot of like deep thinking, substance, debate with another human being. Because I think AI ultimately it's about pattern recognition. I don't think we're there yet. I guess that's my point. So to answer your question more concretely, it really depends on the task.
And to add a further data point to this, also this week we had a report coming out from Microsoft and LinkedIn reporting that 75% of knowledge workers use AI at work. And not only that, but also they want to use more AI at work, and they don't want to wait for companies to catch up. So we have all these trends here on, so people are very eager to adopt the technology. Maybe some others are being impacted negatively by that, but it's still up for discussion if maybe at some point we'll get a bit tired from that, or we'll be using a decision framework as the one that Chris was just discussing, of this 2x2 matrix, and depending on the type of task and the complexity and so on, if we might say automatically, hey, this is just an AI task, or hey, actually I will not need a guy for this because I really need a specialist that takes care of that. So let's cover our last segment for the show today. And so here we had like a funny title for that. It was Mamma Mia, AI's uneven playing field, triumphs and tribulations. Why is it meant by that? It is that we had a recent report on the rise of AI hubs, meaning that some cities, especially in Europe, are having more AI companies, seeing more AI investment, having some more progress in this space. But this is not being even. So it's not that every major city in Europe is having some sort of like AI boom or having more AI companies and so on. And not only that, but also the companies themselves that are being created, not all of them are capable of attracting significant funding. It just really depends on the location where they are, where they're based. The city that has generated the most AI companies is London in Europe. So this is really that 27% of all AI startups were started in London. And it is far ahead from pretty much everywhere else in Europe. So we have Paris with 10%, we have Berlin with 12%, and other major cities are also represented, but also the difference is massive. So for example, you would think that something such as Stockholm, so Sweden, is often touted as being this tech hub. So we know Spotify and other companies that came from Sweden, but only 2% of AI startups have been started in Sweden. And we're starting to see really this divide between places that are benefiting from the AI boom, others who are less. Max, so you are here an investor. Are you getting pitches from all over Europe? Are you getting companies that are maybe from less known locations, maybe from some student towns with strong university departments? Or is it really, as the report says, that it's pretty much London by far and then follow a little bit by Paris and Berlin?
I'm just trying to think based on the conversations that I've had so far. I must say a lot of the AI companies that I met will have definitely some representation from the large cities that you talk a little bit about, which is, London, Paris, or Berlin. I feel like there is I guess, compounding effect from, the presence of capital, the presence of different folks, almost like a melting pot for ideas for people to come together to create companies. And also, I would say, large corporates like Google becoming a feeder for some of these startups, founders in this larger region. And for France, it would be, Meta, for example. And we have seen that, all this talent that are coming out from those larger big tech companies and spun out and started all these AI companies. So I think there is almost like a compounding effect on having those companies in the cities. My alma mater, for example, UCL, has deep ties with DeepMind, which has deep ties with Google. So that kind of provide a lot of opportunities to create companies. So to answer your question, I actually see more startup that are coming from London, Paris, and Berlin at the moment that works in AI. There are obviously exceptions, but most of it come from the larger hubs, at least based on my current purview.
Another thing so to cover here on related to like these hubs and so on, and also the impact between those who have AI and those who have not, it is the performance of the public companies. So where we keep thinking about AI is benefiting those who are investing in them, it is really something that is having an impact in valuations, in startup funding and so on. But apparently this may not be necessarily the case. Just here a data point from Salesforce. So Salesforce historically has been considered, before the generative AI wave, was considered one of the innovators in the machine learning and any type of predictive modeling space. They have Einstein as so here their AI efforts, and this has been going along for quite a while.
I actually think you can just look at my 2x2 and you'll know why Salesforce doesn't really get anything, because they're like, low IP and digital, so it's very easy to disrupt. And I think the features that they have introduced are not so much value adding that people are willing to pay more.
With this, we can wrap up another episode of the Chris Rodman Show. We cover 3 segments. First, we discuss about how AI is impacting consumption of electricity, how it is having an effect on our energy grids, how we might have some sort of sovereignty across not only AI adoption, but also how countries might have dedicated infrastructure for this and want to have control over it, of which systems they're running, which electricity they're using, and how this is being run. Because as adoption grows, also electricity consumption will keep skyrocketing. We're seeing how a simple ChatGPT search has a consumption of energy that is 10 times higher than a Google search. And of course, it's not good for the environment, but also companies who are energy conscious, users, they'll start looking at it, and also startups and other vendors themselves, they'll start seeing this as an opportunity to differentiate themselves, as seeing themselves as green AI vendors, for example. In our second segment, we're discussing about how really we have now numbers to quantify the impact that is having AI in specific creative jobs. How for creative writing, freelancers are seeing that they're getting 20% less wages versus 2022 when there was no ChatGPT at all. We're also having this decision-making framework from Chris on when to use AI for which task and when not. Likely, companies and also users will start having these decision-making matrices because although, of course, creative tasks are being accelerated with AI, we must not forget that often the answers are generic, they're not specific, they're not precise, and therefore, many companies will instead prefer to work with humans for tasks that require much more precision. And finally, we're discussing a report on AI hubs across Europe. How really London is the AI capital by far. 12% of all AI startups surveyed, they are coming from London. And this a little bit changes some consensus that people have historically, where some cities that were considered relevant in terms of research, relevant in terms of AI startups or just startups in general, they're not figuring in the map. And how AI progress is really not trickling throughout geographies, but really being concentrated among pretty much 3 spots, 3 major hubs in Europe: London, Paris, Berlin. In all these 3 segments, we're really seeing how indeed we're having a benefit, we're having tangible impact from adopting AI, but it's becoming a little bit of a haves and have-nots. Those who are using it are being benefited, those who are not using it are being affected, those who are directly affected by technology are really affected, but also cities and technology hubs who do not have strong positioning, well, they're being left behind. This is all for today. This is another episode of the Chris Rosmack Show. Remember to like, subscribe, give us our comments. We're receiving feedback from all of you of the things that you like, the things that you would like to see us covering, what we should change. We're there for you. Tell us also who should we bring to the show. Maybe you would like to have some guests. Maybe we should interview someone. Leave all that in the comment section. And of course, if you like this episode, share with your friends, tell about it. We are looking forward to see you next week in another episode of the Chris Rosmack Show. Great that you were here this week. See you next week.